And we are live. My name's John Paul Berg, and this is Dumb the Wiser. Special episode tonight. We have two very special guests, Mr. Andre Maloche and Oliver Heydorn. And the topic of discourse tonight is going to be Douglas social credit. Not to be confused with Chinese social credit, which is, I'm sure, a common conflation. I'm just becoming aware of this. Like we were talking prior to the live broadcast, and I have to say, the more I read, the more intriguing this theorem is. So, Andre, I guess we'll start with you. Tell me your experience in learning about this.
Well, last year I'm a reader of Dr. E. Michael Jones. So last year, Dr. Jones went to Rougemont, Quebec, and I had the chance to go and meet him because I read many of his books. And at the same time, it was in the Pilgrims of Saint Michael in Rougemont, Quebec. And this is where I met Dr. Jones. This is where I met Dr. Heydorn, and we started to have a discussion. And I didn't know about C.H. Douglas' social credit doctrine, so we had many discussions. I bought two books of Oliver, and I read the first book, which was quite a challenge for me to understand what is this system and how come it is not known. Especially in Canada, because I think Oliver will talk most probably about the Alberta experience, which could be very relevant today. So I was very intrigued. Now I'm starting to understand a little bit more. I'm starting to read the second book, Life of Our Own. So the more you read, the more you go deep into concept, but the idea of the system is quite fascinating, in my opinion.
It is indeed. But before I hand it over to you, Oliver, it's like I say frequently, like we could speculate about the network or supranational structures that are kind of running things behind the scenes in the Western democracies. But one thing that's for sure, seemingly irrefutable, the mechanism that is utilized to kind of keep us in perpetual debt slavery is monetary policy. The chains that enslave modern man is the monetary system, in my estimation.
Yes, that's exactly right. The money question is, in my view, the most important question. It's the core of the whole thing because it's the mechanism by means of which wealth, power, and privilege are centralized in the hands of a tiny oligarchic, plutocratic elite at the top of the social pyramid. And with all that wealth and power, they are in a position to impose all sorts of antisocial policies in finance and economics, cultural policies, international policies that most people don't want. But these policies serve to centralize power even further in their hands. So, we wouldn't be where we are if we had an honest, functional financial system in place in the first place. And in Canada, if I can say this, I think Canada had and still has a vocation, a mission to be a light to the world, because it was here in Canada that Douglas social credit made the greatest inroads, actually. In 1935, see, a lot of people don't know this. All this history has been memory hold, and nobody talks about it. You certainly won't hear about it on the CBC. But in 1935, the world's first social credit government was elected in the province of Alberta. And the leader of the Social Credit Party in Alberta, that was William Aberhart, Bible Bill Aberhart. He was a Protestant preacher who had a weekly radio program. He wanted to do something in the midst of the Great Depression because of everything that was going on. He was a principal at a high school, I think it was outside of Calgary. And because of the Depression conditions, one of his students had committed suicide. So he was sort of personally affected by everything that was going on. So he had heard about C.H. Douglas, this British engineer that had come up with the idea of social credit. And they organized themselves very well. And in a very short period of time, about a year or two, they won a landslide in the provincial election and formed a social credit government. Eberhard lived until about 1943, so he was in power for about 8 years. He died in what are believed to be suspicious circumstances. But every attempt that he and the Social Credit Party had made to implement C.H. Douglas's proposals for monetary reform, every attempt they made to implement it or some aspect of it was thwarted by higher authorities. So sometimes it was the Lieutenant Governor General who said, no, you can't do that. Or sometimes it was the courts. Sometimes it was the Mackenzie King government. Sometimes it was the Supreme Court. And the province had actually at one point appealed lower decisions to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in London, which was the imperial government. And of course, they said, no, you're just a province. According to the terms of the British North America Act, you don't have any jurisdiction over banking. And so, yeah, every attempt that was made was thwarted. And even then, there were some people, I don't know how numerous they were, but there were some people who were saying, well, if a democratically elected Alberta government can't introduce monetary reform in the public interest, then maybe Alberta should separate. Maybe Alberta should go its own way. That didn't happen, of course. But they were sort of pushed in a corner where what people were demanding from the government couldn't deliver because of all this interference. So it's, I think, instructive. We have people talking now again about Alberta separation, Quebec separation. I want to make the point that, in my view, an independent Alberta is not going to solve anything if they don't exercise sovereignty over the financial system and actually ensure that the money system is working for the common citizen. Because right now, the way that it's designed, it works for that small plutocratic elite at the expense of the common citizen. So without monetary sovereignty and without putting in a system that actually serves the common interest, I don't believe that Alberta independence is going to resolve anything. In fact, it probably will only be used by the globalists to further the globalist agenda, right? If Alberta leaves, that's the main source of transfer payments. Quebec is the main beneficiary of transfer payments. So if Alberta leaves, Quebec will leave. If Quebec leaves, you'll be cut off in the Maritimes. BC will be cut off. And then what happens? Are we looking at a North American Union? It's or a European Union, as Carney is talking about. I would say the same thing in the case of Quebec. You've got people now who are talking more about Quebec separatism, but it's the same problem. The money system is really the key issue. Unless you exercise sovereignty over money, you cannot exercise sovereignty. It's just a facade, right? So that's what Douglas social credit was all about: making the money system work for the people. And you do that by ensuring that it's an honest system.
It's like you're saying, like, how independent are nation states if we're all reliant on this monetary system? I mean, that's where the big decisions are made. I mean, at the level of our governments, there's seemingly superfluous legislation. I mean, they can impose a lot of things, but we can't really see any reform or any resolution because it is controlled by the banking system. So in order to be truly sovereign, you would have to detach yourself from that system. Now, I was just watching one of the conversations you and Andre had, and you guys were discussing how Douglas himself didn't think the best way to implement social credit was through a political party. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give a bit of history, because again, this is not something that most people are aware of. The Alberta Social Credit Party held power till I think 1971, about 36 years. And after Eberhard had died, the premier was Ernest Manning. He took over, and Ernest Manning is the father of Preston Manning, right, of the Reform Party. Ernest Manning decided around 1948 that he would purge the Social Credit Party of all genuine believers in Douglas's analysis and proposals. And the party sort of morphed into a conventional center-right political party. Of course, at this time, they also discovered oil in Alberta. So we're a long way now from the Depression. Economic conditions are improving, and people are forgetting about monetary reform. Ernest Manning, when he retired, actually became a director for the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. So this sort of illustrates some of the problems that we have in liberal democracy with the party system as it operates at present. There was also a social credit party in British Columbia, which held power from about, I think, the early 1950s to 1991. And there again, too, they weren't in a position to actually introduce monetary reform, just being a provincial government. But little by little, they became conventional, and people ended up being attracted to the party who weren't committed to monetary reform and didn't even know anything about it. Interestingly, Kim Campbell, who was prime minister, the only female prime minister we've had, she was prime minister for 4 or 5 months in 1993 at the tail end of the Mulroney government. She got her start in the Social Credit Party in British Columbia in the mid-1980s. But I think if you were to ask Kim Campbell now, she's still alive, what is social credit, or why was the party called social credit? She probably couldn't tell you, right? There were also, after the 1962 election, 30 social credit MPs in the House of Commons in the federal parliament, and they held the balance of power. 26 of those came from Quebec through the Ralliement Créditiste, and that was led by Réal Coët. So it was a significant force in Canadian politics. Now, Douglas himself said that establishing a political party to introduce social credit is not the way to go. And I think he was correct about that for a number of reasons. One is, if you designate a particular party as social credit, you automatically put the other parties in a position of having to be anti-social credit. And Douglas's position was this is not a partisan issue. The money system should work in the common interest. And so anyone of any party or of no party should support it. With political parties, you also have the problems that we saw with the actual social credit parties in Canada. If people see, certain people who are aspiring politicians see that a segment of the population is behind social credit, they'll gravitate to the party, the social credit party, because it's a ticket to power. But those aren't the people that we want in the parliament in the first place, right? So Douglas's idea was that we need to put pressure on the MPs who are already there, regardless of party, not only regarding monetary reform, but really everything, to ensure that the legislation that is being passed is actually in the common interest and supported by the population. I mean, that is in essence what democracy is supposed to be about.
And so, like, politics being downstream of culture, the way to potentially implement this would be to educate people in society and have a change in the culture, and then potentially influence politicians at that junction.
Yes, I would agree with that. If, Andre and I have talked about this a little bit, if, I don't know what the magic number is, but if 1 million Canadians, or 10% of the population, really understood how the existing financial system functions, how it malfunctions, and what could and should be done to remedy it, I think just that knowledge itself would push things in a more constructive, positive direction. Because once you understand what Douglas was saying and how he proposed to to fix the situation, you can't really look at the world in the same way. You know, everything looks different. Unfortunately, well, I mean, it's I'm sure it's purposeful. Most people don't only have the vaguest of notions about what money is or where it comes from or what effect it has on the economic system. So this, I think our task in the social credit movement is to try to educate as many people as possible. That would be the sort of the immediate goal, and that in itself should help to move things in a positive direction.
I think so too. Andre, let me involve you a little bit here. Well, give me your, because you've been reading about this, but you're still new to discovering this. Give me your best cold sales pitch. What would be the most simplistic way that you yourself could kind of define what this system entails?
Well, I would go with maybe three fundamental concept, and I think Oliver mentioned it. Money has to serve people and not the opposite. And money is a way to exchange good and services. Money is not a way to control people. That's the first thing. The second thing, and that's why we have central bank. I wanted to refer to John Rockefeller, who said, "Give me the control of money, and I can do whatever I want." With the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve in the United States is a private entity, like the Central Bank of Canada is supposed to be independent, but we actually know that they are part of the Bank of International Settlements. It's a pyramid of power. Oliver mentioned it. So first of all, money should serve people. The production should equal the distribution or the consuming product, because now you have a artificial scarcity. They create scarcity to control the market. That's the second thing. And I think the third thing is, maybe Oliver will talk about it, the mechanism that will make sure that you can produce goods and service for everybody. I think that's the three main, I would say, concept that could summarize social credit. Of course, it's quite complicated because you have a mechanism to prevent inflation, the concept of dividend and what credit. And what I would like to say, the expression social credit, Oliver mentioned it in a interview 2 or 3 weeks ago with two American podcaster. They asked him why you don't rebrand the expression social credit. He said, but first of all, we were here first before the Chinese Communist Party. And me, I like the idea. Social, which means for everybody. Credit comes from credo, means trust. So trust in society. And this is what we don't have actually. You see the level of I would say how people despise politicians. They despise the institution, the system. Even if sometimes the system in itself is good, not the monetary system, but the political system. The system of representation. All those concepts are good, but they are hijacked by people who are opportunists. And that's why Oliver mentioned something important: a non-partisan movement, a non-partisan doctrine. Because if you are a social creditor and you have the power, you will have opponent. I think it's the most important thing, in my opinion.
It's interesting when we talk about scarcity, because like when you look at our current system, and again, my conception of a lot of these ideas is very rudimentary, but scarcity is seemingly the animating factor. It's the scarcity is what kind of necessitates productivity in our current system. Like people, that's what keeps the whole farm running, essentially, is people are chasing that dangling carrot. So it's almost like, would it be safe for me to say that social or Douglas social credit is more based on an abundance as opposed to a scarcity, or like the required amount to service the economy?
We could say that, in physical terms, the economy, the real economy, is it is abundant. Right? We can bury ourselves in goods. We can produce far more than we're actually able to consume. But Douglas's key insight, which sort of forms the core of the whole thing, uh, has to do with the observation that the existing financial system, because of the way it's designed, it's not self-liquidating, right? So, I'll take a step back and firstly talk a bit about money. Most people, when you talk about money, even today, a lot of people think that money is something physical. It's bills and coins. But the bulk of the money supply actually exists in the form of bank credit. It's intangible. It exists as numbers in an account. And the private banking system creates this money in the form of bank credit. It's 95% of the money supply whenever it makes a loan or a purchase, right? Now that in itself is not a problem. The question is, what is the policy that the financial system serves? Is all this money creation benefiting the common person, or again, is it benefiting a small elite at the top of the pyramid? So Douglas was he was a mechanical engineer, and he had worked in many different countries. He worked in Argentina, in Canada, and India. And during the First World War, he was sent down to an aircraft factory in Farnborough. He was a major in the army at the time of the First World War. And he was given the task of sorting out an accounting muddle that this factory had got itself into. And he noticed that during the course of a week, the factory was producing costs and prices at a faster rate than it was distributing incomes to consumers in the form of wages, salaries, and dividends. So he thought, well, that's kind of odd. This is sort of strange. Maybe it's just to give you an example, maybe it's creating £1,000 in costs, but it's only distributing £600 in wages and salaries. Well, how can £600 buy £1,000 in worth? So he looked at 100 other British companies, and he noticed that the same pattern was present, that unless it was headed for bankruptcy, the company was producing costs and prices faster than it was distributing incomes. So what this meant was that there was a gap. There was a chronic underlying deficiency of consumer buying power that was built right into the economy because of the way the financial system is designed, the way that it functions. And he thought, well, this means basically the economy is put on a basis that is fundamentally unbalanced. There's no homeostasis, right? We should be able to consume in full whatever we produce if the financial system were an honest system that accurately reflected the physical reality. Now, of course, the system has to find some way to compensate for this lack of consumer buying power. And because we live under a debt money system, the way that it does that is to induce some economic agent to go further into debt. So this is why governments run deficits, right? Because running a deficit is a way of distributing additional income and compensating for this price income gap. And also you've got consumers who, why do we have mortgages, car loans, lines of credit, credit cards, installment buying? Consumers borrow from the private banking system. The private banking system creates the money that it lends in the form of bank credit and gives it to the consumers in exchange for a debt, because consumers can't make ends meet. They have to borrow to buy. And of course, you also have businesses that borrow and expand operations in the hope that they'll be able to sell goods and services in the future. So all this borrowing is going on under the existing system because the system is not self-liquidating. And of course, at the same time, there's compound interest that's being charged on all of this compensatory debt, which is, centralizing huge amounts of money and power in the hands of those with financial assets, in the hands of those who own and operate the banking system. So there's a lot more that I could say about this, but this was sort of the fundamental kernel of the social credit movement, that contrary to what everybody seems to assume, including orthodox economists, politicians, business people, etc., common citizens, we're not actually automatically paid enough income to buy back in full what we produce. And so we're always behind the ball. And that's that scarcity, right? There are all sorts of terrible things that happen as a result of that. People then they try to fill it in different ways that, yes, okay, maybe you get more money and it helps to fill the gap in the moment, but you're also tallying up ever increasing debt. And probably you're engaging in things that don't really interest you, or you wouldn't otherwise be doing, but the system demands it in order to keep everything running. Right? So one of the I suppose the most salient examples of this is every country in the world, because they're all running the same financial software, they've all got this chronic lack of buying power, and they've got to fill it under pain of societal collapse. They try to export more than they import. That's one palliative, right? So a country like Canada, we might give away in real wealth more than we actually import in real wealth. And the financial system says that that's a good thing because you're filling your gap. But in real terms, in physical terms, we're actually losing wealth because we're not exchanging goods for goods. And we were partially exchanging goods for goods, but because we're running a favorable balance of trade, we're exchanging some of those goods merely for monetary tokens, right? But in physical terms, that's a dead loss to the country.
So
it's also a zero-sum game because not every country can win in this battle. So it causes conflict, and sometimes that conflict translates into military conflict and war.
It seems like instead of the monetary system serving the people serve the monetary system. And that's kind of the underlying feature of our current system. So just a quick question. I'm going to pass it over to Andre. What you were describing there, is that like what I've been reading about the A plus B theorem?
Yes. Yeah. So Douglas based his claims on observation, empirical observation, and also on mathematical modeling in the form of the A plus B theorem. Yeah, and the basic cause, I mean, there are many factors that can contribute to a lack of purchasing power, but the basic cause has to do with real capital, machines and equipment, right? The way these things are costed under existing accountancy rules, it requires over time businesses to demand more money from the consuming public than they distribute to the consuming public, because very often you have to pay for real capital two times over or more. You've got to pay for the purchase, the manufacture of it, but you also have to pay for its replacement, and depreciation, and you have to pay for maintenance. So at all times, any productive organization that has a real capital component, it's not just, human labor, it is generating costs and prices faster than incomes, because not all capital costs are fully distributable in the form of income, right? We could say in the case of labor, and I don't want to get too pedantic about it, we could say when it comes to labor costs are fully distributable as income, right? You pay someone to do a job, they get a wage in exchange, the two sides balance. But when you bring capital, real capital into the picture, maybe for every $100 you have to charge as a business to maintain your physical capital, you're only distributing, let's say, $60 to the consuming public. And somehow the system has to provide more money to fill it. And right now, because of the nature of the system, the only thing it can think to fill that gap is to get somebody, government, business, or consumers, to go into deeper and deeper into debt, or to export more than you import.
Makes sense. Andre, jump in here, man.
Well, no, I'm listening because I have an example. For example, Oliver's mentioning wages, how you can sustain or support wages, and if you produce, I take an example. You produce cars. You produce 1 million car per year, but you can sell only, let's say, 500,000. What do you do with the rest of the car? I've calculated that you have maybe 3 cars for each citizen on the territory of Quebec. Two of those cars are in car dealers, you know, storage. What is fascinating is that the system creates more goods to provide wages so people can buy goods. But what I'm starting to understand is that, and I think Oliver mentioned it in his book, maybe we'll touch about the concept of full employment, especially with what is happening with AI. I think it is Rogers 1 or 2 weeks ago who laid off 10,000 people in one night, and because companies, they're replacing workers or labor by AI. So the idea is that you want to provide more wages. You will produce more goods, but they're not consumed. So then you arrive and you say, "What do I do with? Okay, maybe I can export." So there's some concept that are not known or understood correctly by people. Maybe Oliver, you can talk about this idea of full employment. We
Mhm.
provide work for people because we want to supply them with income, not because they are useful. Everybody wants to
Mhm.
be useful in their life, but I've witnessed it myself. Sometimes you ask yourself, does my work makes a difference? So maybe you can talk about this idea of full employment, especially with a very high technology society where you said
Right.
yourself, we live in abundance.
Mhm. Yeah, so in addition to the fact that we live under a debt money system where virtually all money enters the economy with a corresponding debt, we also have as an axiom this idea of full employment, that everyone has to work for a living or be dependent on those who do if they're too old, too sick, what have you. And this policy of full employment is there not because we physically need everybody working. Economics in the real sense, or in the physical economics, you could say, is supposed to be about efficiency, getting the most for the least. C.H. Douglas, as an experienced engineer, said over 100 years ago that in the UK, probably only something like 25% of the available workforce was actually necessary to produce all the goods and services that the whole population required to survive and flourish. So what's happened is, because we have this gap, and because one of the main ways of filling it is through debt, and because debt often involves constant economic growth for the sake of growth, we also have to find ways to employ all these people who otherwise wouldn't have an income under the existing system. So and this is being noticed more and more by all sorts of commentators who probably know nothing of C.H. Douglas and social credit. But you had Dave Graeber, for example, who wrote the book 5,000 Years of Debt. And he also wrote a book called Bullshit Jobs. And what he says there, there are many, many jobs that are, to a greater or lesser extent, witless, useless, redundant, and or destructive, but they're there to distribute income because the system requires it. The system doesn't know how to distribute things otherwise. And so, you have a situation where the real capital that has been replacing labor as a result of industrial progress and has been generating this gap between costs and prices on the one hand and incomes on the other, that replacement of labor by real capital is also what's throwing people out of work, right? It's enabling us to do more or better work with fewer and fewer people actually being employed. And yet we insist, no, everyone's got to work, right? So then this provides an incentive for the growth of bureaucracy, crossing T's and dotting I's, because everyone's got to do something, even though a lot of those people would be better off caring for others in their community or tending their gardens or, having children or what have you. So that the two problems are intimately related. We've got, as a result of technical progress, we've got a gap between costs and prices and incomes, which we can only fill with debt. And we're also becoming more and more able to produce everything we need with fewer and fewer people working. But we insist in a very puritanical fashion that we've got to maintain, we can't deviate from the debt-only system, and we can't deviate from full employment, right? So the implications of this are vast. I mean, the environmental implications, you've got people who are concerned about various environmental problems, and some of them I don't think are real, but there are real environmental problems, and a lot of them are caused or exacerbated by the way that we run the financial system, the economic system. We've got to have continual growth for the sake of growth, full employment. So we use resources, we create all of this pollution, when actually the system could function far more efficiently and sensibly if we introduced monetary reform. Now, this is, I mean, admittedly, this is quite radical, really. I mean, the average person doesn't even imagine what could and should be in place, what easily could be in place if we actually had sensible financial infrastructure as the basis for civilization. A lot of people now are concerned with immigration, well, or mass migration. I think it's true that in the last few years, in particular, that's been weaponized. But before that, we were bringing in 400,000 people, 500,000, 400,000 into Canada every year. Why? Because in order to balance prices and incomes under the existing system, we've got the economy. And if people are not reproducing enough, they're not having enough children, then you've got to import people who can work and people who will take on debt, and people for whom additional government production and services has to be provided. So that's why we have immigration. It's not because our leaders think that it would be just so wonderful if we opened our doors to the rest of the world and have people from all over come and live with us. This is it's an economic necessity under the existing system. But as I say, in the last few years, it's been completely weaponized, and they've gone overboard because they want social instability.
I think so too, and I really grasp what you're saying there. It's like our current system is predicated on this endless growth model, so that naturally facilitates. It's almost like a Ponzi scheme. If we don't keep feeding people into the system, then it no longer functions, and someone's going to be held holding all the debt, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Well, I if I may say, growth, I associate growth with progress since the Enlightenment. Progress is good, regress is bad, growth is good, degrowth is bad. And it is like, if you have a country that is stable with a birth replacement of 2.3 children, you don't need growth. Inflation should be zero. Production of goods and services should equal the consumption, and then you have a replacement of the population with youth people with a good education, a system that is balanced. But because the system creates this unbalance, I think Oliver mentioned it, and scarcity, it's not only the money, it's also the birth rate. We see it in Canada now. It is 1.3 children per woman. So you arrive at a point where you say, if I want my system to grow, I need mass migration, not only for to keep wages low. This is another question, but I think, in my opinion, now we are at a point where the debt is so huge that the only way you can repay the interest or you can keep the system afloat is to bring a huge amount of new immigrants. You cannot sustain a system that is already falling. And it's Oliver mentioned something important. Economists who are criticizing social credit without even knowing what is social credit. I'm not an economist, but I will challenge any economist who will say socialism is best, capitalism is best. I would say, if capitalism was working, United States would not have $39,000 billion of debt and exporting their debt since 50 years. And we would not have in Canada $1.3 trillion of debt, which is $80,000 per citizen, including babies. Who can pretend that this system works? It doesn't work, but it works for some people. The hyperclass and people who control this, the money printing system, and the scarcity. I think, and Oliver mentioned it, full employment, it's a scam. It's not that you don't want people to be lazy. You just want to give them time. The only great value that we have in our life is time. How do we manage or use our time? I think it's very important. When they start to lower the number of hours that you work per week, 60 years ago, it was 50, 60 hours per week. You were working Saturday, and they were promising in 2000 the leisure society. We never saw it. But they keep on promising that the paradise will arrive tomorrow. I think maybe the system of Douglas understood very well the two systems that are dysfunctional. Socialism, which is based on means of production controlled by a small group in the name of the people. And you have the capitalist system who says the elite, the wealthy, will redistribute the wealth because they know better. They don't. They just don't know. And those two systems, no, they don't work. So I think that the idea of Douglas was extremely it was a great innovation in 1918, 1920. Maybe, Oliver, it's 100 years old, this system, and more.
Yeah.
How come we cannot implement it today? Is it a question of opportunity? I don't know.
Yes, I mean, Douglas social credit has been in the public domain for well over a century. And there were some very prominent people involved in it, like the American poet Ezra Pound. Large number of people in literary circles were quite interested in it. Gorham Munson, who's an American literary critic, wrote a whole book about it called Aladdin's Lamp, The Wealth of the American People. In fact, I hesitate almost to mention this, but since I suppose this is being broadcast on X, Elon Musk's Canadian grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, after he left technocracy, and we assume that his conversion to social credit was sincere, but it may not have been, he was active in the social credit movement in Saskatchewan. And he actually gave a speech on the CBC in 1948 called Social Credit versus Communism, where he basically was saying that, the only thing that really can neutralize the communist menace, this is in the context of the Cold War, was the Douglas social credit system. One of the problems we've had in the social credit movement, to say prior to 2014 or so, was that whenever you talked about it, social credit, some people would assume, there must be some form of socialism. But I would say socialism is different things to different people, But I would say that as it is commonly understood, Douglas social credit is not only not socialist, it's anti-socialist. It's basically free enterprise plus an honest, functional financial system, right? So there's no command economy, there's no central planning, there's no nationalization of the means of production, there's no welfare state, there's no excessive bureaucracy or regulations or things of that nature. We haven't yet talked about Douglas's particular proposals for remedying the financial system, but essentially, if we had what he suggests we ought to have in place, you could dismantle a lot of the government. I mean, the government is as big as it is because there's this gap that needs to be filled, and it runs deficits, it runs programs to help distribute incomes and to help fill this gap. That's why Keynesianism was adopted, and we still run on a Keynesian system, really, insofar as we have deficit spending. Keynes had actually sat on a banking committee, the British Macmillan Committee, in 1930, where Douglas was called to give evidence, and won't be able to get into it now, but we have reason to believe that Keynes basically found a way of addressing the problem that Douglas had identified, the recurring underlying price-income gap. But his solution involved increasing government debt and work on under government direction, right? Which again is the centralization of power. What Douglas wanted was to decentralize power in favor of the common individual. You can do that through monetary reform, but not that sort of option is not on the menu and won't be on the menu unless we put it on the menu. So people need to know that actually there are other ways of addressing these issues than what the political class and the oligarchy that backs it would have us consider.
So I just want to let you gentlemen know, and the audience too, if you guys see me looking down, I'm taking notes because there's so much that I want to address. I don't want you guys to think I'm just scrolling on my social media. But it's interesting what you said there, because this system should be appealing to libertarian-minded individuals.
Yes.
More so, and that's what's so shocking that we don't hear about it, because so many libertarians, and a lot of my audience identify as that, they worship the free market. Like there's things they're not grasping. I think it's like you're explaining, like our system, it kind of necessitates us serving this system, and it doesn't have to be that way. We could still maintain agency. In fact, it's probably a better way to maintain agency through this system. So it's just, when I look at why I didn't know about this, like I obviously I'm not a scholar. I'm not a real scholar anyway. I have a lot of curiosities, but like I know a lot of these things. Like, why is this not common knowledge? And then my mind goes, well, obviously it's the most powerful interests in the world would definitely not want this type of a theorem to spread.
Well, one thing Oliver mentioned, Keynes, the free market, and I'm happy you refer to the libertarian, because they believe in free market. There's no such thing as a free market, because you have the invisible hand of the market. The question is, which hand is it? Because if there's an invisible hand that controls the market, and we think about the NASDAQ, or we think about the S&P 500, they are manipulated. We saw Trump, how he's manipulating the stock market since 1 month now. And you mentioned something, how it is not, how they're not teaching this doctrine, because they have people who don't want us to know. I didn't know about this system 1 year ago. Even if I'm not an economist, and like you, I'm not a scholar, when I discovered it, immediately I said, how come they're not teaching this? How come it's not implemented?
That was my exact reaction into learning about it. I'm looking forward to learning more about this. Like, it's like I was saying prior to the live broadcast, I'd like to do a series of these if we can. I
Sure.
definitely would like to read your book first, so I have more intriguing questions to ask. But this has absolutely captured my interest. I'm definitely looking forward to learn more. So with that said, what would your best guess be to how this could be implemented? Like what's an actual course of action where we could see this type of reform happen?
Well, I'll get to that in a moment, but before I forget, I just wanted to mention that you were talking about libertarians. I think that Douglas social credit, while social credit is not libertarian as such, I think that Douglas social credit is the only practical, feasible way of giving libertarians what they want most, which is smaller government, much smaller government, less powerful government, uh, lower taxes. It's astonishing. Tax Freedom Day in Canada, I think, comes the middle of June. It's almost half the year paying taxes, income taxes or sales taxes or property taxes. Half the year working for the government. It's we tolerate it. It's just, it blows your mind. But Robert Heinlein, I don't know if you can see this here. Robert Heinlein, who was the author of Starship Troopers, he was a libertarian, and his first book that was published posthumously was called For Us the Living, a comedy of customs. And this book, novel, explains the Douglas social credit system within the context of a fictional story, of course. But this is another example of how much traction it actually had at one time, and nobody knows anything about it now. As far as implementing it is concerned, I think the first objective is to break the bottleneck and find ways of getting as many people to consider this seriously, to put it on the table for public discussion. And once we have that, then you have to put pressure on the politicians. You have to get organized and find ways of putting pressure on the politicians so that if they want to get elected, they will have to get serious about monetary reform. One of the first things a government should do would be to have a national balance sheet and a national profit and loss account. Every business has to have a balance sheet and a profit and loss account. And if we did that for Canada as a whole, then we would be in a much better position to actually assess our financial and economic situation and to see how we might advance along the road of monetary reform.
It seems as though your connection is lagging a little bit. Now I heard all of that, but your video is skipping a little bit. Potentially the bankers are sabotaging your signal.
But there's one thing you were mentioning, John Paul, about how to implement this. Of course, it's through education, but considering what happened in the last 12 years under the Liberal government, they more than doubled the debt, and there's no accountability. Even the actual opposition party, they do not challenge the government whatsoever at any level. I'm so astonished to see that people that comply with this huge, monstrous deficit year after year, and we can talk about the COVID era, but it's not the subject, and they continue to accept a system that enslaved them more and more each day. It's shocking.
There was a study recently that came out from the Fraser Institute, and it was indicating that your average family in Canada is losing 42 to 43% of their income to this government. So that's outrageous. And I don't think a lot of people even realize that, because it's normalized. We've been conditioned to accept this system and the way it functions, and it's seemingly so complicated, and we're not educated by this. It's like I said, Canadians graduating out of a regular high school diploma, they're virtually economically illiterate. They're even illiterate in regards to the functioning aspects of our Westminster parliamentary system. They don't even understand how that works, and that again is by design. If we had a lot of critical thinkers in Canada, we would have a lot of people trying to think about how to resolve these issues, which doesn't benefit the people that have the power.
And it's a concern as well, because if you're handing over directly or indirectly 43% of your income, that means that, of course, you've got less disposable income to buy the goods and services that you require. So what do you do then? You have to run into the arms of the banks to borrow what you lack, and then you end up paying interest on that. So you get squeezed from both sides, right? It's quite insane, really.
Can we, in your opinion, Oliver, can we get out of it without, I will be harsh, but without a revolution or a civil war? Because one day,
Yes,
people, when they will be fed up with this, I don't know how we can get out of it. Is there a strategy that we can implement?
Well, I mean, Douglas was not in favor of any kind of revolution, violent or otherwise. He thought through education we can evolve. The system we have is not sustainable. It's not financially sustainable. It's not economically sustainable. It's not culturally sustainable. It's not environmentally sustainable. In terms of international relations, as we're seeing now, it's not sustainable. So it's going to run aground, and God forbid, the powers that be, of course, already have their own ideas as to what they would like to substitute for it, which would be CBDCs, a conventional UBI, which has nothing to do with Douglas social credit, digital ID, and a Chinese social credit system, which is actually the opposite of what Douglas intended. That's another thing we haven't talked about, but until about 2013, 2014, if you spoke about social credit, you were talking about Douglas social credit. That was the only social credit in town. And then for some reason, the Chinese Communist Party decided that they would baptize this system, this surveillance, reward and punishment system, social credit. And there are debates about how common it is, or if it's inchoate, or whether it's operative at the level of the whole country. But there is something in China that they've called the social credit system, and it's been proposed by other politicians elsewhere. And the idea, of course, is that the state, the government, would watch everybody, and depending on how you behave, if you behave in accordance with party policy, government policy, you'll be rewarded. And if you deviate from that policy, you'll be punished, right? And everyone's got a social credit score that goes up or down, and depending on what your level is, you get certain privileges or you get denied certain privileges. Douglas's idea, and I should mention that social goes beyond finance and the money problem. Douglas had developed a whole social philosophy and also a political theory. Douglas's basic contention was that if you want a stable, prosperous society that maximizes freedom and leisure, then you've got to set society up in such a way that it's the citizens, it's the common citizens who are watching the politicians and the bureaucrats and the business people and all those who exercise political authority. And it's for us to reward or punish them, depending on whether we're pleased or not with the results they're giving us.
So that could be a good message, John Paul: reward or punish the politicians.
Well, that's right. I mean, they're supposed to be public servants, and it's like the public has forgotten that aspect. And they don't wield the authority directly. It's through us, and we give them that authority, and it's not functioning like that. It's like, at this point, you have to say it's an epic failure. And if we don't come up with some kind of pragmatic solution, I fear we're going to see something potentially violent. So the climate is right for an idea like this to garner traction. So let's just hope people are pliable or malleable into putting the time in to learn it. Because again, like something like this is not simplistic. You actually have to do some thinking. You have to do some learning. And in order for that to be facilitated, there has to be people who are educating the public about it. So I very much admire what you're doing, Oliver, and I'd really like to have you on, like I said, for a series of these talks, because I'm personally incredibly intrigued by this. This is kind of what I was looking for and didn't even know I was missing.
Right. Yeah, we haven't talked about this yet, but I found out about social credit 20 odd years ago through the same organization that Andre had exposure to less than a year now ago, which is the Pilgrims of Saint Michael, Les Pèlerins de Saint Michel, which is a Catholic organization that has been promoting Douglas's ideas for many, many decades. And sometimes they've done mass mailings of the country, with their leaflets. And I think it was 2002, one of their leaflets ended up in my mailbox, and I read it out of curiosity and thought, I think they're onto something. And the rest, as they say, is history. So we are having a conference, the first international conference on social credit at Rougemont in Quebec at the Pilgrims headquarters later this month, May 21st and 22nd. And Andre has been so good as to offer to serve as the key facilitator and moderator. I'll be presenting a paper. To learn about this, anyone who would like to come, we're more than happy to have you. And they're asking, I think, for a $100 donation, but meals and accommodation are free. And you'll meet a lot of interesting people from all over, not all of them social creditors necessarily, or Catholics. We're open to everybody. But that is one practical thing that we're doing now to try to get the message out there.
It's again, man, I'm totally compelled by this. I'm looking forward to learning more about it. With that said, we're kind of coming towards the end here. I want to give you the final parting words. But before we do that, could you tell everyone where to find you and where to find more information regarding this?
Sure. So they can go to SOCRED.org, SOCRED.org, which is a website that I run. It's got a lot of Douglas's books and articles and speeches from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. And it also has a lot of other literature that was written by other people in the social credit movement. We also have an animated series, which is available on YouTube. So if you just type in Douglas Social Credit, you'll see the cartoon figure of Douglas come up. And we've got, I think, 42 videos now that are looking very closely at key aspects of Douglas Social Credit. And people, if they look at one video a day, within 40 days, they should have a good handle on what it's all about.
Awesome. Do you have any parting comments, Andre?
Well, like Oliver mentioned, the conference will be May 21st and May 22nd. There will be 12 speakers, including Dr. Oliver Heydorn, and many people will try to present the system in itself, but also the link with the Catholic doctrine, monetary reform. There are many, many topics that are interesting in this conference. And the small clip that Oliver did, all those cartoons, they were very interesting because it's 3, 4, 5 minutes. And of course, the book of Oliver, but, somebody wants to start with the basic, with those small cartoons. Like Oliver mentioned, after 1 month, the person will have a very good idea of social credit, at least the great concept. And after that, link this with other system and try to make the difference between what we have now and what we could go through in the future.
Awesome. I really
And if anybody wants to have any information, they can reach to Oliver and I, or Ellen Khmera. I will send you the link. So if they want to attend, most probably we will have also some live broadcast, but it's not official yet, but we're working on it.
So what we'll do, Andre, if you would be so kind, is the broadcast of this will be pinned to my X profile. So if you could share the links underneath that post, people could just click right under and look and get informed regarding this.
Good. Excellent.
Awesome. Well, with that said, gentlemen, I really want to thank both of you. This has been a learning experience, and I look forward to learning more.
It was a
Thank you very
pleasure to be
much,
here.
Jean-Paul.
Excellent, gentlemen. Stick around and we'll say our goodbyes. Thank you everyone for watching, and I would appeal to you guys if you could please share this stream. It's very advantageous. Cheers, everyone.